And now on the line is Janie Lazar from End of Life Ireland. Janie, welcome back to Near FM.
Darren, good morning to you and good morning to your listeners. Thank you for having me back on the show.
Okay, Janie, our last interview on Near FM was about 10 months ago. Before we talk about the current state of play in relation to possibly bringing in assisted dying in Ireland, can you remind our listeners, first of all, Janie, please, as to who End of Life Ireland are?
Yes, indeed. We are a volunteer-led and volunteer-run organisation, and this is we know in Ireland people don't talk about death and dying enough. We're great at funerals. We're great at, if you like, looking after each other in that process, but we don't talk about what our end-of-life wishes are enough whilst we're healthy. That was really why we set up. And then, of course, we believe in autonomy and the ability to be able to make our own decisions about what we want and what we don't want, importantly, at the end of life.
Because
so we have been advocating for voluntary assisted dying for a considerable number of years now, and I suppose we came to public attention when Gina O'Kenny's bill, supported by Vicky Phelan, came out, the Dying with Dignity bill. We were always inspired by Mari Fleming, who your listeners may or may not recall had MS, and realising that her condition was becoming unbearable to live with, wanted to be able to end her life at her choosing when the quality of life that she had was unacceptable to her, and she took a case to the Supreme Court. But we knew at that stage the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act needed to be enacted, if you like, before assisted dying would be considered. So once that bill came out, we then set up to lobby and campaign, importantly to educate around the topic of assisted dying.
Okay, I know because of Gina O'Kenny's bill, there was an Oireachtas Committee in the last Dáil. In our last interview, Janie, we spoke about the Oireachtas Committee report that was published last year on assisted dying. It would be true to say, I imagine, that you and End of Life Ireland are disappointed that there has been no major moves by the Irish government since 10 months ago. Are you, Janie?
Very disappointed, and it's extraordinary how much you learn about politics in the process of advocacy. There have been many private conversations with different politicians, many conversations with people working within healthcare, and it's not just us at End of Life Ireland and our supporters. 76% of the population in a Sunday Post business poll conducted by Red Sea said they wanted to see legislation for assisted dying and not just for terminal conditions. So the majority of the public want this, and that figure is pretty consistent throughout the world. But our politicians, for whatever reason, have gone absolutely quiet on this, and not just End of Life Ireland, but many of the public are also extremely disappointed that this issue is being ignored.
Okay, and it wasn't included in the programme for government. From an international point of view, Janie, has there been much change since our last interview? Because I understand, for instance, that there was an international conference held in Ireland a few months ago, wasn't there?
That's right. We organised a conference, and it was in September of last year. We had delegates and speakers from over 20 countries, experts in the field of healthcare, legal, ethics, all here exchanging what was happening around the world. It was all about education. We had all of the talks recorded, and they are now up on the End of Life Ireland YouTube channel. We had contributions from members of the public of personal experiences to say why this legislation mattered to them. And I have to say, whilst it was a international success, the interest and acknowledgement of the conference by senior healthcare professionals in this country who should have been there was as disappointing as the politicians' inactivity now. Why would you not come to engage with global experts when they're in your country? But it was a marvellous conference, it really was.
Speaking of politicians again, there are some political parties in Ireland, I believe, that agree with you totally in End of Life Ireland on the issue of assisted dying, aren't there, Janie?
There are indeed, and this is what I say, you know, you have some conversations which are honest and open, whether somebody's parents, one of them perhaps has had dementia, they've been through that painful process, or a cancer diagnosis. But interestingly, the parties who are prepared to say, yes, we support this, yes, it will be in our manifesto, Social Democrats, Labour, obviously people before profits, and some of the independent TDs and senators supported this. The two main parties, even though some of their members behind closed doors agreed with this, and indeed voted on the special Oireachtas Committee that ran in support of this, have not come forward to continue that support. I think it's, I'm sorry, I just really feel it's a disgrace. This is about choice. This is about choice.
You're talking about Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Am I right in saying Sinn Féin are not in favour of it either?
They, individuals there have spoken openly and believe equally it's in choice. I believe quite a few years back, there was something in one of their groups' policies that they supported assisted dying. David Cullinan, who sat on the committee, was very fair, very balanced, and actually since the beginning of the year, he's actually been quoted as saying this is an issue that must be addressed by government. So I think they realise the importance of it, though it may not have been in the latest manifesto.
In their latest manifesto, pardon, say that again?
I don't believe there was anything written down in their latest manifesto, but certainly they are aware of the issue. And I think Mary Lou spoke to Vicky Phelan going back in time on this and other issues. And Mary herself has been put through the mill. As we know, she had different health issues. So I think people are becoming more aware of it, but it's become the political hot potato that the main parties do not want to discuss, despite the public supporting this.
Yeah, leading us into talk about our next questions, because it's you kind of already answered it, but I don't know, but I think Janie, maybe not having a left-wing party in the new government, like not having the left-wing party may result in legislation on assisted dying not coming to pass over the next 4 or 5 years. Would you think that is possible, Janie?
Well, anything's possible, as is the current government doing something about it. And I would like to think that they would do the right thing. I do think it overall, assisted dying aside, I do think we need left-wing parties in government.
Okay.
I think then, yes, I think there would be more discussion. But at the moment, it's goodness, it's taken us long enough to get the current government together, hasn't it?
And there was actually an Oireachtas report published last year. That was the topic of our last interview. So an Oireachtas Committee in the last Dáil, Shannon, actually published a report. Am I right in saying they published a calling for the government to legislate on the issue of assisted dying?
That's right. They put together a report that had, I think, 38 recommendations in it, which covered absolutely everything from issues around coercion, training, what would be included in the base legislation. And those recommendations were presented to government just coming up on 1 year ago. So they have lain dormant. Also, it is now 11 years since Marie Fleming died, and the Supreme Court judgment saying that the Oireachtas could legislate. So all of the building blocks are there, and what we want to see now is an implementation group set up. An implementation group to involve all the key stakeholders to progress this issue, and also to get, if the politicians are worried that they're going to fall out of favour if they legislated without public opinion, we would say set up a citizens' assembly, canvass the public opinion and concerns in that, because I'm pretty sure if they did that and it was run properly, and an implementation group also set up, then the progression of legislation appropriate to what people need, want and deserve would be smoother. But in the absence of anything happening, the silence is absolutely deafening. And I'm sorry, Darren, that is unacceptable.
Oh.
It's denying that people are having to travel for an assisted death, or are indeed looking at taking their own lives, which, as we know, happens and can go terribly wrong.
I won't keep you much longer, Janie. Can you remind our listeners as to who was the Cathaoirleach or chairman of the Oireachtas Committee?
Michael Healy-Rae.
Okay, and he's a Minister of State now, isn't he?
I don't know that he's Minister of State. I'm sorry, I hadn't.
Okay, no. He's a minister. He's a minister. I think it's for forestry. Like, he was only appointed in the last week or so, you know. So.
I took that as Minister for State for Foreign Affairs, but that's Simon Harris. No, he, as Michael Healy-Rae has always said, Kerry first, Kerry first, Kerry first. And I would question what actually happened in the Oireachtas hearings that ran over 9 months, and I was at every single one. And I think he whilst the work was done, I would venture my personal opinion that his own personal views coloured the running of some of those sessions.
Okay. He was actually the chair of Cathaoirleach, but his report that he wrote himself actually called for the government to legislate. So even if he has a personal opinion that it shouldn't happen, the majority of people who spoke at the Oireachtas Committee are in favour of assisted dying. So
that's right. Yeah. It was nine votes. 9 votes in favour of the 14 who are on the committee. That said, I mean, the report, the recommendations to legislate were presented to the press. And the reason why I make the comments that I have just done is that at that same press conference, Michael announced that he and 2 others were going to launch that afternoon their minority report in opposition to the recommendations. And to me, that's bad form on the part of any politician. And I was disappointed that actually happened. I thought it was out of order. But, you know, politics is politics. And we learnt a lot. But certainly, Darren, what I would say is the majority of the public want to see this legislation. The volunteers in our group, we're a tiny group. We're all either living with life-limiting, incurable, or terminal conditions. We know this legislation is wanted, and the public deserve to have this legislation in place. We will not give up.
I think maybe it's going to take international pressure in the sense that, like, if assisted dying is legalized in, say, some other countries in the world over the next, say, 12 months or a year or two, I think the media coverage of that issue, of that country, will put it into the spotlight again. So I think that's kind of, my personal opinion is that's where the hope lies. Do you think that could be the case?
I think it's exactly the case. I mean, the Isle of Man are progressing at the moment. The Isle of Man, Jersey, Scotland, they are all progressing, as indeed are the UK. And at the moment, we are the outliers. And
Did
yet
UK or even legislating for it, are they?
They have the third reading of the bill, and that has been happening in the last 2 weeks. And I think it's the 11th of July that they will report on their decisions. But the way it's looking at the moment in the UK, they've had extremely healthy, respectful parliamentary meetings on this. They're all available on the UK website. They have listened, the committee there have listened to the international expertise, and the conversations have just been respectful, constructive, and extremely informative. And I would advise anybody who's interested in this whole issue to go onto the UK parliamentary website to listen to them. Decades of experience from global experts have been invited back in. They've listened to all sides, as indeed we did, in a very different manner. But things are moving on. International movement on this and creation of legislation, I think, will hopefully oblige our politicians to bring this back on the agenda.
Okay, Janie, it looks like I'll be talking to you later on in the year when the UK legislation gets enacted, if it's before the end of the year, which I imagine it would be. I don't know. But thanks for coming on the programme again, Janie. I'll talk to you again later on in the year, okay?
Darren, very many thanks. Thank you.